welcome to everybody that is on the call. Welcome to our panelists, facilitators, and guests. This is our 4th episode of our gender-based violence webinar series, and we are so honored to have every single one of you here. So just a little bit of background about Muse. Muse Afrika is a non-profit organization working to fight gender-based violence through the stimulation of conversation, the education of our generation, and the sourcing of necessary resources. And tonight's discussion will be based on solutions and what we can do moving forward. And it'll be run by the youth. Without further ado, let me introduce you to your facilitators, Riabetswe and Lucky.
Hi guys, my name is Riabetswe Madibu, and I will be your facilitator tonight along with Lucky. I am a student at Wits University studying an economic science degree, and today's episode is basically going to be centered on possible solutions towards gender-based violence. There will be some brainstorming, there will be some interrogating of current solutions, and yeah, it's just an exciting conversation. I'm excited to have it, and I'm just going to hand over to our second facilitator, Lucky, so he can introduce himself and so you guys can be acquainted with him.
Hi, everybody. Thanks once again to the Muse Afrika team for having us here. It's been an exciting series. My name is Lucky Letsabo, as my co-facilitator mentioned, Riabetswe. Education enthusiast. I'd like to think I'm part of the youth, even though I'm on just dipped over the other side of 30. And I'm looking forward to a great conversation. I'm looking forward to, once again, people feeling vulnerable. And I think at the end of the day, very solutions-based, as my co-facilitator said. So I remind those that are tuning in to just understand that these are just ordinary people trying to give their personal opinions and personal objectives in terms of how we can try our best to fight the scourge. And then to our panelists as well, if you can try your best to be as open and as comfortable as possible in terms of answering the questions. There are some loaded questions, as we've seen in the last previous weeks. But we're expecting a lot of you to just bear with us, number one, and try and understand where everybody's coming from in terms of the answers given. So I will be co-facilitating with Ms. Riabetswe. I would like to introduce our panelists, or rather I'd like to give them an opportunity to introduce themselves. So I'll start with our lady panel. So we've got 6 panelists today, if I'm not mistaken. 3 guys and 3 girls, and let's introduce them. So ladies, I'll start with you, Slee, because I see you on my screen first. So I'm not picking on you, but just a very short and sharp intro. And if you can have all the ladies and then followed by the gentlemen, thank you.
Okay, no problem. So hi guys, my name is Slee. So I'm a Wits Master student. I'm doing political science, and yeah, my focus pretty much for my research is men as allies, how men can contribute to fighting against gender-based violence. And yeah, that's pretty much me.
Okay, thank you, Slee. Let's ask Nobu to introduce herself.
Hi, everyone. I am Nobu Kosi Zulu. You can call me Nobu. I am a human rights activist. I run an NGO that specializes in gender-based violence and victim empowerment and violence prevention in KZN. I'm so excited to be here. Last week, I was, the last time I was here, not last week, I was referred to as the next generation. Guys, I'm 31. But listening to you young people talk, I actually feel that intense generational divide, and I'm so proud of all of you and excited to be here.
Thank you, Nobu. And then I will ask Boipelo to please introduce herself.
I am Boipelo Moagi. I am in 2nd year doing business science and finance and accounting at UCT. My pronouns are she and her, and I'm a strong gender-based violence activist against gender-based violence. And I'm just really interested in ways in which we can empower and uplift women and encourage them to take up space, as Miss Universe has said. Yeah.
Thank you, Boipelo. Sorry, I did forget about the pronouns. I just want to go back to Slee and Nobu. Could you guys please just state your pronouns before we can move forward?
No problem. So, yes,
right?
Same, she and her.
All right, that's
sorry.
perfect. Okay, and then now I'll be moving over to Tafara. Please, can you introduce yourself?
Right. Good evening, everyone. My name, as previously mentioned, is Tafara Mkombe. I am studying my second year at UCT, specializing in finance and accounting, a Bachelor of Business Science degree, as Boipelo is doing as well. I am currently involved in starting up an organization by the name of Masidi, which is really primarily catered towards the protection of women and the education of the community through the use of an application. And like everyone has mentioned, I'm so excited to just have this conversation tonight. Looking forward to the insight and obviously making use of this as a learning opportunity.
Yeah.
Oh, and yes, my pronouns are he and him.
All right, thank you. Okay, now I'm going to ask Given to please introduce himself.
Thank you, Riabetse. Good evening, everyone. I think my pronouns are, why am I saying I think? My pronouns are he and him. I work for Sonke. I work as Sonke's Communications and Strategic Informations Unit Manager. That's basically, I think I always say this in every webinar, it's a very fancy way of saying I talk too much the whole day. I think that's what I get paid for, and just to talk the entire day. Also, I mean, keeping up with the WITS theme, I'm also nearly completing my master's at WITS. Yeah, I think that's me. Yeah, in short.
Thank you. And lastly, I'm going to ask that we please have Bilo introduce himself.
Hello, everyone. My pronouns are he, him. I'm going to keep with the UCT theme. Well, I was at UCT before COVID. Now I'm at the University of UCT, but from home campus. I'm doing my second year BCom accounting. I'm a first time, I guess, activist. I think this is the first time I'm taking up this course so seriously. And it's just an honor to be here, you know, amongst people who I look up to. So I'm looking forward to some good debate.
Thank you. I will mention before we start, if you need to leave at any point during the conversation, please can you just let us know, and we'll gladly let you go. Yeah, but there's nothing else left but to get into it. So I'm going to hit us with a little nice starter, and I'm directing this question to everybody. Where do we draw the line between authentic and performative activism? And I would like us in this question to try and define the two and distinguish the difference between the two. So anyone who want to start us off?
I'll start because I think it's something that I have a deep passion for. It's an issue that has grown in my heart ever since I've moved to a rural area. And I think when I lived in Joburg and worked in Joburg at the big organizations, you can think that that's what authentic activism looks like until you meet real activists on the ground, rural women who do it out of a deep passion and a deep conviction without any fame or glory. They earn absolutely nothing. They use their meager resources to fight the causes that they believe in. And I think when I think about authentic activism, I think of it's something that's sustainable, it's long term. You do it out of your own conviction. You're not waiting for the trend, you know, and you're performative. It's what's trending. So it's August, it's Women's Month. Okay, I'm gonna jump on the GBV bandwagon, and then when it stops making headlines, you've moved on. If it's something that you can move on easily from, it's not authentic. If it's something that you need to be seen doing, if it's something that you need to gain recognition and honor for doing, that for me tends to be very problematic, because a lot of the like real hardcore GBV activists, we will never know their names. They will never win any awards, you know, but there's a conviction of heart and design inside of them. So I think for me, that's the difference. I think your motivation, how long you stay with it, If after, you know, you hear someone saying a conversation after like 3 minutes, they're like, oh, we're still on this GBV thing, but they were tweeting all the hashtags, right? And then like, okay, so it took a week later, we're still here, you know, and there's people who've been fighting this for 30 years, for 20 years. So yeah.
Right.
I think I'd follow on to that, especially in terms of, so the definition that I think I'd agree with Nobu on her definition, but the only differences I'd add is something that I've had to come to terms with is how deep is your activism for it to be actual activism and just performative. Because a lot of gents, me myself included, up to a certain point, we were like, okay, just sharing petitions, posting that thing, that's enough. You know, I'm done now. Guys, I was activist for so long. But it's deeper than that. Like,
and then after that, it's let's talk about FIFA.
After that, yes, exactly that. I think it's deeper than that, you know, as much as people tend to be like, oh, we can't talk about it every day. But when you do talk about it, do you give it the full attention it deserves? You know, whereas if it's performative, it's just for the moment, it's done. Now, next thing, you know. So it's after I've done posting, what do I do next? You know, and that's where the line.
I think like adding on Nobu and what Mpilo said, for me, performative is doing it when it's trendy, as they said. And what would be more authentic to me is what conversations you have in your own personal capacity. Because in reality, you can't change the world, but you can change your own world. So how do you speak about certain topics in your own personal capacity in a way that it can influence your own circle? And that, for me, is what I would say is authentic and not as performative.
Buipwila, if I may just interrupt you there, I apologize, ma'am. Just a reminder to everybody, please, if you can mute yourselves unless you're actively engaged. There's a murmur in the background, I don't know if everybody can hear it, of somebody or family members. So just so that everybody's able to hear each other clearly and we're able to have a conversation that's as uninterrupted as possible, just a reminder to please mute yourselves. Whoever that person is, there's still a child in the background murmuring. Sorry to interrupt you, Buipelo, I just needed to mention that.
Yeah. No, it's fine, I finished.
I can go next. I think, thank you, Riabetso. Thank you for a very useful question. I think it's a very useful question in terms of where the conversation is going. I think for me, I mean, I'm not only speaking for myself, but I'm speaking for Sonke as an organization in this instance. I think firstly, I'd like to qualify the fact that I don't want to assume the homogeneity of activism. So I think my starting point won't necessarily be dichotomizing performative activism and, I suppose, genuine activism, but I just say our definition of activism as Sonke, in particular, let me say my definition as someone who heads Sonke's communication and Sonke's media image is that what I try to do is to show that we are not a reactionary organization. For example, gender-based violence is very key to the work that we do, and I do my best every single day to demonstrate that we are thinking about these issues, whether they are trending or not. Because as people who are working on the ground, the reality is a lot of stories get missed by the media. You know, I'm always fascinated by, for example, the media, I suppose, media attention, and when in fact the stats are always probably even worse without their attention most of the time. So for me, without drawing a distinction between the two, I'd like to say I think how we as an organization see activism is by demonstrating that we are actively thinking about particular issues, and we don't need media attention to demonstrate our I suppose our stance on particular issues.
All right, thank you so much. There has been a huge theme of media here, And I wanted us to segue into how in our previous episodes, we've actually discussed the inadequacy of media and social media as a tool to fight GBV. Now, I wanted us to discuss how can we improve the shortcomings of using this particular method as a form of activism.
If I could go first, I think one of the shortcomings that may have been discussed previously is that it doesn't reach everyone that it needs to reach. I think one of the current dangers that we face is that, you know, if you go into Twitter, if you go into Instagram, what ends up happening when you use social media or relying on it too much, you end up creating an echo chamber where it's everyone's retweeting the same thing, you know, and I mean, that's not counterproductive. But if that's the only sort of security that we're going to rely on, then we are working against ourselves here. There needs to be furthering of those efforts in terms of reaching the people who don't have Twitter, who don't have your social media entirely, because those are the people who need to hear it often the most time. You know, we're fortunate because we'll hear it at varsity, we'll hear it with our friend group, you know, but just last week when I went to go visit my cousins, you know, I was telling them about, you know, this gender fluidity and spectrum, and, you know, they were like, what is that now? You know, we laugh about it. I'm like guys, pronoun, that's the thing. And they're like, pronoun, man, why am I pronoun? You know, and that's what we need to get to, you know, because there's an awful lot of people missing out on the message.
All right.
Yeah.
Anybody else?
Yes, Rabbit. So I think, so the media is not without fault.
Yeah.
For example, that's why I personally taken the decision to train for example, some media houses on gender-based violence, sensitivity, etc. Which, as it stands, it's been a useful interaction with the media. It's been a useful interaction with the media. The ones who disseminate, you know, what I deem is most of the time sensitive information. So I've personally found it necessary that the media be trained. But I think in terms of the media and looking at it as an advocacy tool, I think what we did not do is look at it in isolation. And I gave an interview. I gave an interview on this yesterday. I was asked about the power of the hashtag. Basically, the media house was bashing the power or the usefulness of hashtags, which I completely disagree with. I think if you look at the media in isolation as a sufficient condition, then maybe it is not doing enough. But I always say that the gender-based violence scourge is a multifaceted war, if we can use that word. And for me, any worthwhile intervention should be multifaceted. We should be cognizant of the multiple social factors that contribute to the scourge. So with that being said, I always say, given the many social factors, you should also account and recognize the different intervention methods. So for me, the media in and of itself, I mean, without a doubt, it's found wanting. The hashtag in and of itself, in isolation, it can be found wanting. But I think if you look at the hashtag as part of a larger intervention, I think for me, the media has a very, very big part to play, because I mean, ultimately the role of the media is for awareness, and awareness obviously leads, hopefully rather, we hope to behavioral change, you know? Now that is immeasurable. We can't possibly measure the effects of the awareness, therefore the behavioral change. But I think in short is that we should not look at the media in isolation, but look at it as part of the many tools that we need in order to I suppose, address the scourge that is gender-based violence.
Okay.
I'll go next, and I'm going to. Okay, sure. Let me go, and I want to answer a question that's just been posted by Andile Mguni. I'm just going to read it out because I think it's a great question. to also answer to what was just been said, she asks to just to play devil's advocate, although the devil does need an advocate. Would you say there's a role for performance activists, particularly in driving the causes of influencing people, influencing perhaps legislation and the engagement of country leaders or even general South Africans who otherwise wouldn't be involved? This is not to discredit the credible work you all do. It's absolutely necessary. So I think that's a good question. I think that's a very valid point. And to write off what was just said, that actually what Given just said is that you do have the different people have a different role, right? And Andy just pointed out something very valid, that sometimes the performances, the hashtags, the oh my gosh, I care so much about this cause, does allow it to, you know, be driven forward. And I think because we live in a very disturbingly celebrity-based culture, you know, whether or not they're valid, whether or not they're doing it for authentic reasons, for some strange reason, as societies, we listen to what celebrities have to say. We care what this person, who may not be an expert in an area, has to say, just because we watch them on our screens every night on a television show, and it gives them some sort of authenticity as a voice on a topic. And most of these guys, I don't think they're passionate about every cause they speak up on, but because it's trending, and when they lend their voice to it, it's obviously performance. It's obviously for followers, but it has an effect. And it actually drives forward the message that you're saying. So great question, Andile Mguni, but it's definitely not, it's not the devil's advocate question. I think it's a valid point that we consider in how do we drive across a message, because I work in a rural area. And when I see stories making headlines in the news, I'm like, hi guys, we see this like all the time, you know, or people just get scandalized by, and we should always be scandalized by abuse. I'm by no means saying that we shouldn't be, but I'm just saying that, you know, we get shocked of, oh my gosh, this is happening. And you're like, but this is happening all the time, you know, until a celebrity picks it up, until a big organization, given, until something like Sonke picks it up, when the who have the access to the media houses picks it up, you know, it's still not, but it's happening every day. But that doesn't mean that because it's been driven by someone big or someone famous makes it any less valid. Here we do door to door. There's no Twitter, there's no data, there's nothing like that. So our activism is door to door. It's community meetings. We're still in the halls, you know. We're trying some stuff with WhatsApp, but that's not happening. They're not on Zoom. They're definitely not on Facebook Lives or anything like that. But the message is getting across. And just because it's not as big doesn't mean it's, you know, any less valid. But that doesn't also mean the really big ones are also any less valid. It's just contextual. And as long as the people get the message, that's what's important.
Yeah.
Sorry, might I just add on what Nobu has mentioned? I think I really enjoy the language that you've made use of there in terms of just speaking about the fact that although you've got a celebrity who's performatively active on this issue by posting stuff on their social media, it doesn't make the matter less valid. However, I do want to add that it is, and this is obviously in response to the question, it is a double-sided sword, a double-edged sword, if you will, because I do strongly believe that the reason why people talk about an issue when it's trending and then no longer talk about it is because of, and I would like to use the word celebrities here, but it's not just limited to them. It is because of celebrities who post and then no longer post after a certain period of time. Which makes it acceptable. It makes it socially acceptable for people to speak about an issue as long as celebrities are talking about it. And as soon as the celebrities are no longer speaking about an issue of that nature, as Nobu mentioned earlier, people just go on to the next big thing.
So Tafar, I'll stop you there. And I'm going to ask you to please perhaps further elaborate on your point by throwing into the mix. You know, Nobu mentioned it earlier about the struggles in her environment in particular, about not having access to social media and etc. And you've spoken in depth about the role of celebrities. So to add on to what you were saying, and I'd like you to, like I said, further elaborate, in a global context, how is our fight different? And by our, I mean South Africa, I mean a third world country. How is our fight different to first world countries? Because I think what Tafara, you've raised, and what Nobu's raised without me being direct, is the fact that we are facing different struggles in how we address gender-based violence, particularly because we're a third world country, or a developing nation rather, is the new term. So creatively speaking, how do we differ and how do we adapt to our environment to help change that? I'll start with you, Tafara, and then I'll take others as well.
Wow, that's quite a loaded question. Thank you so much for asking. I think maybe for the sake of answering, I'd like to just divide it. I would love to divide that question. I think we have now brought a couple of different aspects onto the playing field here. The first thing is resources. That's number one, and I'll address that first. The second thing for me then is the mindset, and I'll get to that afterwards. So firstly, when speaking about resources, and again, and I think Nobukosi would perfectly elaborate on this when she answers, is the fact that the majority of the country doesn't know these things because there's no Wi-Fi, there's no data, and hence there's no access to social media where these issues are constantly being discussed. I think many of us who are on this Zoom today, obviously A, found out about it because we have access to social media, but B, we're here because we have a passion for gender-based violence and solving the issue, a passion that was garnered or forged because we've constantly engaged with the matter. Dare I say on social media, but also in other spaces where people in those spaces have access to social media. They have the resources to engage. And so how we differ from these first world countries is, number one, the lack of resources. You can't teach someone something over a resource that they do not have, unfortunately, and that's just the truth. The other thing for me then is the mindset. And this kind of ties in part with the resources agenda or the resource topic, but I do believe that there is a mindset that is, I don't know, for lack of a better way of putting it, is forged in the thought that if it's not me or it's anyone that is close to me, it's not a problem. You know what I mean? And given
so
yes,
mindset
yes.
is a big one, Tafara, and I agree with you. So again, you've mentioned, you know, where the shortfalls are, and perhaps I'll bring you in here, Slee, to say, you know, in understanding the point of today's Zoom of solutions based. How do we fix that? How do we solve that? Yes, we are a developing nation. Yes, we don't have access to X, Y, and Z. But what can we do about it right now in our own environments, in our own society?
Yeah, no, that's a very good question, because I think a lot of the influences when it comes to activism derives from the West. So you have a lot of campaigns like the White Ribbon campaign. You have He for She. I think that's quite an international campaign. So you find that a lot of these sort of activism from the West is sort of mimicked to an extent in our context. But here we have an issue where as Tapari said, is that it has to be, something that we can relate to as South Africans. So I think looking into, as you were saying, access to social media, which is something that the West is privileged, for having, but then we don't exactly have that particular access. And also we need to understand that we do have quite a large township community that we need to reach in terms of education. So you find that a lot of these sort of township, youth or, township men, don't exactly have the sort of necessary education about gender-based violence. So when we speak about GBV, they may not exactly understand it, or they may sort of push it to the side as something that's unimportant. So I think being able to reach those particular communities, and I know that Sonke is doing that, which is great. It's a great job, because we have to educate and build these sort of kind of skills and understanding how we can engage with each other in a way that is equal, right, as men and women. So I think with that, with us being specific in our context, it's looking into different various things, right? It's looking into the cultural aspects, it's looking into historical contexts in South Africa specifically, and how those particular certain aspects actually influences gender-based violence, and how we can be able to sort of mitigate against those things, or kind of stop, for instance, this sort of township violence or masculinity from continuing to perpetuate itself, you know, in this present context. So so I think there's a lot of things that we need to engage upon in terms of trying to fight gender-based violence specifically in South Africa.